My name is Olivia, and 3 weeks ago, I was still sleeping in the bedroom I had decorated myself 30 years earlier. Soft cream walls, lace curtains, and the antique dresser my mother left me. Now, I sleep on a narrow fold-out cot in the storage room behind the kitchen. Strange how quickly a life can shrink. The room smells faintly of onions and old cardboard. There's a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a dull yellow light that never quite reaches the corners. At night, I can hear the refrigerator humming on the other side of the wall, steady, indifferent, like a machine that doesn't care who sleeps beside it. It's temporary, my daughter had said when she first suggested the change. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you stop being useful. That evening, I sat on the edge of the cot, rubbing my stiff hands together, trying to warm them. The house was quieter than usual. Upstairs, I could hear Emma laughing, light, effortless laughter. The kind she used to have as a child. Now it belonged to someone else. To Daniel, my son-in-law. Their voices drifted down through the vents. "We finally have space to breathe," Daniel said. Emma replied, softer, but I could still hear it. "I know, it feels like it's finally ours." Ours. I closed my eyes. I had paid for this house. Every brick, every window, every inch of polished wood floor. I had worked double shifts as a nurse for nearly 20 years after my husband died, just to make sure Emma would never feel the absence of stability. And now I was the guest. No, not even that. Guests are welcomed. I was tolerated. 3 months ago, everything still felt normal. Lonely, yes. Quiet, certainly. But mine. Then Emma called one evening. "Mom, we've been thinking," she said. "It doesn't make sense for you to live here, all alone. Daniel and I could move in, help you out, you know?" I remember how my heart lifted at that moment. Help. Company. Family. I said yes, without hesitation. That was my first mistake. At first, it was small things. They rearranged the living room to make it more modern. My old armchair, the one I used every evening, was moved to the corner, then replaced entirely. The guest room became Daniel's office. The garage? His workshop. Soon I was asking permission in my own home. "Is it okay if I use the oven? Do you mind if I watch TV?" It happened so gradually, I didn't even notice when the balance shifted. Until the day Emma stood in the doorway of my bedroom. "We need more space," she said. "You don't really need this whole room, do you?" I remember staring at her, searching her face for some sign of hesitation. There was none. Daniel stood behind her, arms crossed. "It just makes sense," he added. "Makes sense." That phrase again. Everything that hurts seems to make sense when someone else benefits from it. The move happened quickly. Too quickly. My clothes were packed into boxes, most of them labeled donation before I even had the chance to object. "Mom, you don't wear half of this," Emma said casually. My blue coat. Gone. My wedding dress. Gone. Even the old photographs disappeared. "It's clutter," Daniel had explained. Clutter. Memories, reduced to inconvenience. That first night in the storage room, I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar silence. Not the peaceful silence I once loved, but the kind that presses down on your chest. The kind that whispers, "You don't belong here anymore." The next morning, Emma handed me a list. "We've organized things a bit," she said. "It'll make everything easier." The list included when I could use the kitchen, when I should stay in my room, when I could receive visitors. Visitors. As if I were renting space. As if this wasn't my home. But I said nothing. Not yet. Because what Emma and Daniel didn't know was that I had already seen it coming. It started about a year ago. A conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. They thought I was asleep on the couch after dinner. "I checked her accounts," Daniel whispered. "There's more than I expected." Emma hesitated. She worked her whole life for that. And now it's time it benefits the family, he replied. The family. Interesting word. It seemed to include them. But not me. That night, something inside me changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing. The following week, I made an appointment. Not with the doctor, not with a friend, but with someone Emma didn't even know existed. And over the next several months, while they were busy planning their future, I was securing mine. Back in the present, I reached under the thin mattress and pulled out my phone. A second phone, the one they didn't know about. There was a message waiting. Everything is ready. Just say the word. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed. Soon. Upstairs, laughter echoed again. Glasses clinked. They were celebrating something. Maybe their new office. Maybe their new life. Maybe the future they believed they had already secured. I lay back down slowly, pulling the blanket up to my chin. The cot creaked beneath me. Uncomfortable. Cold. Temporary. Just like they said. I smiled in the darkness. Because, unlike them, I knew exactly how temporary it really was. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, not because I had slept well, but because my body had grown used to discomfort. The thin mattress beneath me had left my back aching, and the faint chill in the storage room clung to my bones. For a few moments, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house before it fully woke up. This used to be my favorite time of day, peaceful, untouched, mine. Now it felt like borrowed time, as if at any second someone might knock on the door and remind me that even this small pocket of silence didn't belong to me anymore. I sat up slowly, wincing as my knees protested, and reached for the small plastic container that held my clothes. 3 blouses, 2 pairs of trousers, a sweater. That was all that remained after Emma had simplified my wardrobe. I ran my fingers over the fabric for a moment, remembering the closet that once held decades of my life. Dresses for special occasions, coats for winter evenings, even old uniforms from my nursing days. Gone, just like that, as if those years had never existed. I dressed quietly and opened the door just a crack. The hallway was empty, but I could hear movement in the kitchen. Daniel was already awake. He always woke early, not out of discipline, but out of habit, the kind of restlessness that comes from constantly chasing something bigger, something more. I stepped into the hallway and made my way toward the kitchen, trying not to make too much noise. The moment I entered, he glanced up from his phone, his expression neutral but not warm. "Morning," he said, then immediately returned his attention to the screen. I nodded and moved toward the kettle. Even something as simple as making tea now felt like crossing an invisible boundary. I could feel his presence behind me, not hostile exactly, but watchful, measuring, as if every action I took needed to be justified. Emma joined us a few minutes later, her hair still slightly messy, her robe loosely tied. "Mom, you're up early," she said, sounding almost surprised. I forced a small smile. Couldn't sleep. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter, glancing briefly at Daniel before speaking again. "We have a busy day today. Daniel has a call with some investors, and I've got meetings all morning, so we'll need the kitchen free." I nodded. Of course. The kitchen, another space that used to be mine without question, was now something I had to schedule around. "I'll stay out of the way," I said quietly. She smiled, satisfied, as if I had passed some unspoken test. "Thanks, Mom. It just makes everything easier when we're all on the same page." On the same page. I wondered which page that was exactly, because no one had ever handed me the book. I took my tea and moved to the small chair near the back door, the one place in the house that hadn't been entirely claimed yet. From there, I could see the garden through the glass, the garden I had spent years cultivating. The roses were still there, though Daniel had mentioned more than once that they were outdated, and could be replaced with something more modern.
Clean lines, he had said.
Minimalist. I watched as a light breeze moved through the leaves, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember what it felt like to belong here, to walk outside without asking, to kneel in the dirt, and tend to something that grew because I cared for it. Mom. Emma's voice broke through my thoughts. Don't forget, we need to talk later. I turned back toward her. About what? She hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. Just some practical things. Nothing major. Daniel glanced up again, this time with a faint smirk that disappeared as quickly as it came. We'll explain everything, he added. Explain. That word carried weight now. It meant decisions had already been made. It meant my role was not to contribute, but to accept. I nodded again because that's what I had been doing for months, nodding, agreeing, shrinking. But inside, something was shifting. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something steadier. Like a line being drawn, slowly, carefully, where no one else could see it. The morning passed in silence. I stayed out of the kitchen, out of the living room, out of every space that had once been mine. I sat in the small enclosed porch, wrapped in my sweater, listening to the muffled sound of their voices through the walls. At one point, I heard Daniel speaking on the phone, his tone confident, persuasive. Yes, we're restructuring things, consolidating assets. It's all coming together. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle in my mind. Consolidating assets. Interesting phrase. It sounded so clean, so professional. Nothing like what it really meant. Around noon, Emma appeared again, this time with a folder in her hand. Mom, do you have a minute? She asked. I looked up from the book I hadn't been reading. Of course. She sat down across from me, smoothing the folder on her lap. Daniel stood behind her, leaning casually against the doorframe, but his eyes were fixed on me. Always watching. Always calculating. We've been thinking about the future, Emma began, her voice gentle, almost rehearsed. About making sure everything is secure. I didn't respond, just waited. She opened the folder and pulled out a set of papers. There are some documents we'd like you to look at. Nothing complicated. Just formalities, really. Formalities. Another word that had started to lose its meaning. I took the papers and glanced at the top page. Legal language. Dense, precise, unmistakable. I didn't need to read every line to understand what it was. Power of attorney. There it was, right on schedule. I felt Daniel's gaze sharpen, as if he were trying to read my reaction before I even had one. Emma leaned forward slightly. It's just a precaution, Mom, so we can help manage things if you ever need it. If I ever need it. The implication hung in the air between us. I looked down at the papers again, then back at her. I see, I said calmly. Too calmly, perhaps, because I noticed the brief flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. We're only trying to help, she added quickly. Everything we do is for you, for me. I almost smiled. Instead, I placed the papers neatly back into the folder and handed them to her. I'll need some time to think about this, I said. The change in the room was immediate. Subtle, but unmistakable. Daniel straightened slightly. Emma's expression tightened. There's nothing to think about, she said, her voice losing some of its softness. It's just paperwork. Even so, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. I'd like to review it properly. Silence stretched between us for a few seconds that felt much longer. Finally, Daniel spoke. We were hoping to get this done today. Of course you were, I thought. Out loud, I said, I understand, but I won't be rushed. Another silence. He looked at Emma, then back at me. Something in his expression had changed. The confidence was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Irritation, perhaps, or suspicion. Emma closed the folder slowly.
Fine, she said.
But don't take too long. This is important. Important.
Yes, it was.
After they left, I sat there for a long time, my hands folded in my lap, my mind perfectly clear. There was no fear.
No confusión.
Only certainty. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had expected. I reached into my pocket and took out my second phone, the one they didn't know about. My fingers moved quickly across the screen. They've asked me to sign. It's starting. The reply came almost instantly. Stay calm. We're ready when you are. I looked up, through the glass, at the garden once more. The roses swayed gently in the wind. Still standing. Still rooted.
For now.
I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. They thought they were preparing me for my future. What they didn't realize was that I had already rewritten it. That night, the house felt different. Not quieter, not louder, just heavier, as if something unseen had settled into the walls, pressing down on everything inside. I lay on the narrow cot in the storage room, staring into the dim light, replaying the afternoon in my mind. The papers, Emma's voice, Daniel's eyes, the careful way they had tried to make it all sound reasonable, harmless, necessary. I had spent most of my life reading people, patients, families, colleagues, learning to hear what wasn't being said. And what they hadn't said spoke louder than anything printed on those documents. This wasn't about helping me. This was about control. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate. Then voices. I sat up quietly, holding my breath, listening. The house carried sound in strange ways, through vents, pipes, thin stretches of wall. If you stayed still enough, you could catch fragments. Not everything, but enough. She's hesitating, Emma said. Her voice sounded sharper than usual, stripped of its practiced softness. I told you we should have handled this earlier. Daniel replied, lower, more controlled. Relax.
She'll sign.
She doesn't have a choice. A pause. She could talk to someone, Emma said. What if she already has? I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of the blanket. Daniel let out a quiet breath.
Who?
She barely leaves the house. And even if she did, it wouldn't matter. The paperwork is solid. Another pause, longer this time. I don't like this, Emma admitted. Something feels off. That almost made me smile. Finally. She was starting to feel it too. Daniel's voice hardened. What's off is that we've been patient for too long. We need this done. The investors aren't going to wait forever. There it was. Not concern. Not care. Pressure. Money. Always money. I leaned back slowly, letting their voices fade as they moved further down the hall. My heart was steady, my breathing even. If anything, hearing them confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't overreacting. This was real. And it was escalating. The next morning, everything felt staged. Emma greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Morning, Mom. Did you sleep well? I nodded, though we both knew the answer didn't matter. Daniel was already at the table, scrolling through something on his tablet, his expression unreadable. There was coffee waiting for me, already poured, already placed exactly where I usually sat. It was a small thing, but it felt calculated, like a gesture designed to create the illusion of normalcy. We were thinking, Emma began as soon as I sat down. Maybe today we could go through some of your old documents together, just to get everything organized. I picked up the cup slowly, letting the warmth settle into my hands. What kind of documents? I asked. She hesitated, just for a second. Financial things. Insurance. Accounts. That sort of thing. Of course. I took a sip of coffee, buying myself a moment. I've managed my documents just fine for years, I said evenly. Daniel finally looked up. No one's saying you haven't, he replied. We just want to help streamline things. Make sure nothing gets overlooked.
Streamline.
Another clean word. Another dirty intention. I set the cup down carefully. I'll think about it, I said. Again. This time, Daniel didn't hide his reaction. His jaw tightened slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table. Emma's smile flickered. Mom, this isn't something you can keep putting off, she said, her tone firmer now. We're trying to plan ahead. And I appreciate that, I replied calmly. But I'll make my decisions in my own time. The silence that followed was colder than anything I had felt in that storage room. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in the small porch again when Jason came in quietly, closing the door behind him. He looked different, tense, uncertain, like he had been carrying something too heavy for too long. Grandma, he said, lowering his voice. Can I ask you something? Of course, I replied, setting my book aside. He hesitated, then stepped closer. Are they trying to make you leave? The directness of the question caught me off guard, but not the concern behind it. I studied his face, the same thoughtful expression his grandfather used to have. Why would you ask that? I said gently. I heard them talking, he admitted, last night, about papers, and money, and moving you somewhere. His voice faltered slightly. Is it true? I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. Your parents think they're making plans for the future, I said. But not all plans are made with the right intentions. He frowned. That doesn't answer the question. No, it didn't. And he was too perceptive to accept half-truths. They want me to give them control, I said finally, over my home, my finances, my decisions. His eyes widened. That's not right. No, I agreed softly. It isn't. He looked down at his hands, clenching and unclenching his fists. I told them it wasn't fair, he said. They said I didn't understand. I reached out and placed my hand over his. You understand more than they think, I said, and more than they're comfortable with. He looked up at me then, something like determination in his expression. Are you going to sign? I met his gaze steadily.
No.
The words settled between us, firm and unshakable. For the first time since this all began, I saw something like relief in his eyes. That evening, the tension in the house became impossible to ignore. Emma moved through the rooms with sharp, restless energy, opening and closing drawers, making unnecessary adjustments to things that didn't need adjusting. Daniel spent most of his time on the phone, his voice low, controlled, but edged with frustration. I stayed in the background, observing, listening, waiting. At dinner, no one pretended anymore. We need an answer, Daniel said abruptly, setting his fork down. About the documents. Emma didn't interrupt him this time. She just watched me. I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my plate. You already have one, I said. That wasn't an answer, he replied. It was, I said calmly. Just not the one you wanted. Emma leaned forward, her patience finally breaking. Mom, why are you being so difficult? We're trying to help you. Do you really think you can manage everything on your own forever? There it was again. That assumption, that quiet dismissal of everything I had already done, everything I still was. I've managed just fine so far, I said. That's not the point, Daniel cut in. Things change. You're not getting any younger. I held his gaze. No, I said, but I'm also not getting any more foolish. The words hung in the air like a crack in glass. Emma stared at me, stunned. Daniel's expression darkened. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Emma pushed her chair back abruptly. I can't do this right now, she said, her voice shaking. She left the room quickly, her footsteps echoing up the stairs. Daniel remained seated, his eyes fixed on me. This doesn't have to be difficult, he said quietly. It already is, I replied. Another silence. Longer this time. He leaned back slightly, studying me in a way that made my skin prickle. You've changed, he said. I almost laughed. No, I said softly. I've just stopped pretending. That night, As I returned to the storage room, I felt it more clearly than ever. The shift. The turning point. There was no going back now. They knew I wasn't going to give in easily. And I knew they wouldn't stop trying. I sat down on the cot and reached for my phone, the hidden one. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I typed. They're pushing harder. It's time. The response came a minute later. Understood. Be ready. Tomorrow we move forward. I placed the phone back under the mattress and lay down slowly, staring into the dim light.
Tomorrow.
Everything would begin to change. Upstairs, I could hear raised voices again, sharper now, more desperate. Words I couldn't fully make out, but I didn't need to. I already knew what they were saying. I already knew what they were planning. And for the first time since they had moved in, I wasn't afraid of it. I closed my eyes, letting the faint hum of the house settle around me. They thought they were tightening their grip, but in reality, they were walking straight into something they couldn't control. Morning came with an unusual stillness, the kind that settles in just before something irreversible happens. I woke before anyone else, my eyes opening into the dim light of the storage room, but this time there was no heaviness in my chest, no lingering exhaustion from another restless night. Instead, there was clarity, a quiet, steady certainty that had been building for weeks, maybe months, now fully formed. I sat up slowly, smoothing the blanket beside me, taking a moment to listen. The house was silent. No footsteps overhead, no voices, no doors opening and closing. For the first time since Emma and Daniel had moved in, I felt ahead of them, not behind, not reacting, but leading. I reached under the mattress and pulled out the second phone. The screen lit up instantly. No new messages, but I didn't need one. Everything had already been set in motion. Today wasn't about planning anymore. Today was about execution. I dressed carefully, choosing my cleanest blouse, the one that still held its shape despite everything. It was a small act, but it mattered. Presentation mattered. Not for them, but for me. For what was coming. When I stepped into the hallway, I immediately sensed the difference. The air felt tighter, charged. Daniel was already in the kitchen, pacing slightly as he spoke on the phone, his voice low but tense. "No, I understand the timeline," he was saying. "We're finalizing things today. It won't be an issue." He turned as I entered, his expression shifting instantly. The tension disappeared, replaced by something smoother, controlled. "Morning," he said, ending the call quickly. I nodded, moving toward the kettle without asking. That small shift, not asking, did not go unnoticed. His eyes followed me, sharp, assessing. Emma appeared moments later, dressed more formally than usual, her hair carefully styled, makeup precise. Another sign. Today mattered to them too. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice overly bright. "We thought we could sit down together after breakfast. Finish up the paperwork." There it was. No more pretending. No more soft language. Just a direct push toward the outcome they wanted. I poured my tea slowly, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them uncomfortable. "Yes," I said finally. "I think it's time we finish things." Relief flashed across Emma's face so quickly she couldn't hide it. Daniel's posture relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained cautious. They thought they had won, that I had finally given in. It almost would have been amusing if it hadn't been so predictable. We sat at the table together. The same table I had bought years ago, now feeling like a stage set for something carefully orchestrated. Emma brought out the folder immediately, placing it in front of me with deliberate care. "I've marked all the places you need to sign," she said, her tone efficient now, businesslike. Daniel leaned back slightly, watching, waiting. I opened the folder, flipping through the pages slowly. Power of attorney, financial control, medical decisions. Everything laid out clearly, designed to transfer not just responsibility, but authority. My life. I let the silence stretch again, long enough for Emma to shift in her seat. "Mom," she prompted. I looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't see control in her expression. I saw anticipation. That was important, because anticipation is fragile. It breaks easily. I picked up the pen. Emma exhaled softly. Daniel's eyes sharpened. And just as I positioned the pen over the first signature line,
The doorbell rang.
the sound cut through the room like a blade. All three of us froze. Emma frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. I set the pen down carefully. "Yes," I said. Daniel's expression shifted instantly. Suspicion, irritation, something darker beneath the surface. "Who?" he asked. I stood slowly, smoothing my blouse. "You'll see." Each step toward the front door felt deliberate, measured. I could feel their eyes on my back, their confusion building, their certainty beginning to crack. When I reached the door, I didn't hesitate. I opened it fully. Standing there was a man in a tailored suit, calm, composed, holding a leather portfolio. "Good morning, Olivia," he said with a polite nod.
Good morning, I replied.
"Please come in." Behind me, I could hear movement, chairs scraping, footsteps approaching. Emma and Daniel appeared in the hallway just as he stepped inside. Their confusion was immediate, visible, almost tangible. "This is Mr. Carter," I said, turning to face them. "My attorney." The word landed exactly as I intended. "Attorney." Emma blinked. "You're what?" Daniel didn't speak at all, but I could see the tension snap into place across his face. Mr. Carter offered a polite smile, though his eyes were sharp, observant. "I believe it's time we had a conversation," he said. No one moved. No one spoke. Then I gestured toward the living room. "Let's sit." What followed was not loud. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures. Just facts. Clear, precise, undeniable. Mr. Carter opened his portfolio and began to speak, his tone calm, professional, completely in control of the room. He explained the trust one had established nearly 2 years earlier. The transfer of the house into that trust. The legal protections surrounding my financial assets. The clauses that ensured no one could assume control without my explicit, verified consent. I watched Emma's face as the information unfolded. Confusion. Then disbelief. Then something deeper.
Fear.
Daniel tried to interrupt once, twice, but each time Mr. Carter continued without hesitation, his authority quiet but absolute. "To be clear," he said at one point, looking directly at them, "the property you are currently residing in does not legally belong to Ms. Olivia as an individual. It is held within a protected trust structure, which you have no claim to." Silence. Heavy. Final. Emma shook her head slightly. "That's not possible," she said. "This is her house." "It was," Mr. Carter replied calmly. Daniel stepped forward then, his composure slipping for the first time. "This is ridiculous," he said. "There has to be some mistake." "There is no mistake," I said quietly. They both turned to me, and for the first time, they were looking at me differently. Not as someone small, not as someone manageable, but as someone they no longer understood. "I knew," I continued, my voice steady. "I knew what you were planning. Not immediately, but enough. Enough to act." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, we were just trying to—"
No, I interrupte gently.
"You were trying to take control." She flinched. Daniel didn't speak. He couldn't, because there was nothing left to argue. Mr. Carter closed his portfolio with a soft, decisive sound. "You will be given formal notice," he said. "You have a limited time to make alternative arrangements." That was it.
No anger. No revenge. Just consequence.
Later, after everything had been said, after the silence had settled into something unrecognizable, I returned to the storage room one last time. I stood there for a moment, looking at the cot, the dim light, the small space that had held me while everything unfolded. It didn't feel like defeat anymore. It felt like proof. Proof that I had endured. Proof that I had waited. Proof that I had chosen the right moment. I picked up my small bag, the one I had prepared days ago, and walked out of the room without looking back. Because I didn't need to. That version of my life was already over. And for the first time in a long time, I was walking towards something that truly belonged to me. The first night in my new apartment felt unfamiliar in a way I hadn't expected. Not uncomfortable, not cold, not lonely, just quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that doesn't press down on you, but instead gives you space to breathe. I stood by the window for a long time, looking out over the small courtyard below. A few people were walking slowly along the paved paths, some alone, some in pairs, their conversations soft and unhurried.
No tensión. No sharp voices.
No feeling of needing to disappear into the background. It struck me then how much of myself I had been holding back in that house. Not just my words, but my presence, my movements, even my thoughts. Here, there was no one watching. No one measuring. No one waiting for me to step aside. The apartment itself was modest but carefully chosen. A small living room with warm light, a comfortable chair by the window, a bedroom that was entirely mine again. Mine, not by permission, not temporarily, not conditionally. Mine because I had decided it would be. That difference mattered more than anything else. Martha had helped me settle in earlier that day, moving the few things I had chosen to keep, the essentials, but also the meaningful pieces. A framed photograph, a small wooden box, a blanket I had owned for years. Not much, but enough. Enough to remind me that my life hadn't been erased, only rearranged. I sat down slowly in the chair by the window and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. There was no urgency now. No need to anticipate the next conversation, the next demand, the next quiet manipulation disguised as concern. Everything had already happened. The confrontation, the revelation, the shift in power. It was behind me. What remained was something far more complicated. Not victory. Not exactly. Something closer to balance. The days that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. I woke when I wanted, not when someone needed me out of the way. I made my tea without glancing over my shoulder. I walked outside whenever I chose, letting the air hit my face, without feeling like I had to justify where I was going or how long I would be gone. It was strange at first. Freedom often is when you've been without it long enough. You don't immediately know what to do with it. But slowly, naturally, I began to fill that space again. Not with obligation, but with choice. Martha visited often, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just herself and her steady, familiar presence. We sat together in the afternoons, talking about everything and nothing, the way we used to before life became complicated. She never pushed me to talk about Emma unless I brought it up, which I appreciated more than I could say. Some things take time to process. Some wounds don't close just because the situation has changed. Jason, however, didn't wait. He came 3 days after I moved in. I heard the knock on the door and knew immediately it was him. There was a certain rhythm to it, not hesitant, not forceful, just direct. When I opened the door, he was standing there with the backpack slung over one shoulder, his expression somewhere between relief and determination. "Hi, Grandma," he said. I smiled.
Come in.
He stepped inside, looking around with open curiosity. "This place is nice," he said, walking further into the room. "Way better than that storage room." There was no hesitation in his voice, no attempt to soften the truth. Just honesty. I appreciated that. "It is," I agreed. "I think I made the right choice." He nodded, then turned to face me more seriously. "They're not doing great," he said. I didn't need to ask who he meant. "Your parents," I said gently. He shrugged slightly. "They're stressed. Dad's angry all the time. Mom, she's different. That caught my attention. Different how? I asked. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Quieter. She doesn't argue as much. She just thinks a lot. I nodded slowly. That sounded like Emma, or at least a version of her I hadn't seen in a long time. Are you mad at her? He asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, simple but heavy. I considered it honestly. I said. For a while. And now, he pressed. I looked out the window for a moment before answering. Now I'm aware, I said. Aware of what happened. Aware of what it means. But anger doesn't last forever, Jason. Not if you want to keep living your life. He seemed to think about that, then nodded slowly. I still think they were wrong, he said. So do I replied. A week later, Emma came. I wasn't expecting it. There had been no message, no call, no warning. Just a knock at the door. Softer than Jason's, more uncertain. When I opened it, she stood there, looking smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The confidence she used to carry so easily was gone, replaced by something more fragile. Hi, Mom, she said. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside.
Come in.
She entered slowly, her eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail. It's nice, she said quietly. Thank you. We sat across from each other, the same way we had countless times before, but everything between us had changed. There was no pretense now. No roles to play. Just truth, waiting to be acknowledged. I don't know where to start, she said finally. That's usually a good place, I replied. She let out a small, nervous breath. I've been thinking a lot, she said. About everything. About what we did. What I did. Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't look away. I convinced myself it was practical, that it made sense, that you needed help, and we were just stepping in. She shook her head, but that's not what it was.
No.
It wasn't. I listened to Daniel, she continued. I ignored the parts of me that knew it wasn't right, and once we started, it just kept going. She paused, her hands tightening slightly in her lap. I didn't see how far it had gone until it was too late. I watched her carefully. There was no manipulation in her voice now. No strategy. Just truth. I'm sorry, she said. 2 words. Simple. Heavy. Real. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I wanted to understand what those words meant, not just in that moment, but beyond it. Apologies are easy when consequences arrive. What matters is what comes after. I believe you, I said finally. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I don't expect anything, she added quickly. I just needed to say it. That's fair, I said. Silence settled between us again, but it wasn't as sharp as before. It was quieter, more reflective. I don't know what happens now, she admitted. Neither do I said honestly. And that was the truth. There was no clear path forward. No simple resolution. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild itself overnight. But something had shifted. Not back to what it was that was impossible, but toward something new. Something uncertain, but real. You can visit, I said after a moment. With Jason. Or alone. But things will be different. She nodded quickly. I understand. I won't give up my independence again. I continued. Not for anyone. You shouldn't, she said softly. For the first time in a long while, we were speaking the same language. After she left, I returned to the window. The courtyard was quiet again, the same gentle rhythm of movement and stillness. I watched as a couple walked past, their conversation light, unburdened, life continuing as it always does. My phone buzzed. A message from Martha. Well, how did it go? I smiled slightly and typed back. Different. Not fixed, but different. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet settle around me. At 72, I had expected my life to narrow. Instead, it had opened. Not in the way I had imagined. Not gently. Not easily. But truthfully. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.